The morning sun cast long shadows through the twisted trees of Kepler 442b, as Dr. Sarah Chen knelt beside the massive gouges in the bark. Her fingers traced the claw marks, each one deeper than her thumb was wide. The wood was fresh, still bleeding sap that smelled like copper and honey. "These are new," she said into her comm device. "Maybe 6 hours old." Beside her, Zixtal's crystalline form shimmered in the dappled sunlight. The Etherean's voice came through their universal translator, sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The pattern suggests multiple creatures. See how the marks overlap? They were moving together. Commander Vorth emerged from behind a fallen log, his reptilian scales dark green with worry. The Ceridian's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "I smell fear here. Not from the predators. From their prey." The fourth member of their team, Pip, chittered nervously from her perch on Sarah's shoulder. The Quillen was no bigger than a house cat, her silver fur standing on end. "Everything quiet," she whispered. Too quiet. Birds all gone. Insects hiding. Sarah stood and looked around the forest clearing. Pip was right. The usual sounds of Kepler 442b's wildlife had vanished. No bird calls, no buzzing insects, no rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They had been on the planet for 3 months now, part of a joint research mission between 4 different species. The colony they had built was small but growing, with scientists from across the galaxy working together to study this beautiful world. Sarah specialized in animal behavior, while her teammates brought their own unique skills to the project. "We should return to base," Vorth said, his voice tight with concern. "Report these findings to the Colony Council." Sarah nodded and activated her scanner, taking detailed readings of the claw marks. The data would help them identify what kind of creature they were dealing with. As they walked back through the forest, she noticed more signs of disturbance. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and everywhere that strange smell of copper and honey. The colony appeared ahead of them, a cluster of white buildings nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Solar panels gleamed on rooftops, and gardens of earth vegetables grew alongside alien plants that glowed softly in the afternoon light. It looked peaceful, safe. But as soon as they entered the main building, Sarah knew something was wrong. The usually busy common area was nearly empty. Those aliens who remained spoke in hushed whispers, their various forms of body language all conveying the same emotion: fear. Dr. Kelness, the colony's Etherean administrator, approached them quickly. His crystalline body pulsed with anxious light patterns. "Did you find anything in Sector 7? "Claw marks," Sarah replied. "Fresh ones." "What's happened here?" Kelness led them to the main conference room, where a holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of the local area. Red markers indicated various locations, all within a 50-kilometer radius of the colony. "Similar signs have been found at all these locations," Kelness explained. "Deep claw marks, disturbed vegetation, and this." He activated another display showing chemical analysis data. "Pheromone traces that match no known species in our database." Zixtal's form brightened with alarm. "Show me the claw mark measurements." Kelness complied, and Sarah watched her teammate's crystalline structure flicker rapidly as she processed the information. When Zixtal spoke again, her musical voice carried notes of terror. "These measurements match archived data from the Centauri incident, and the Vega colony disaster, and the massacre at Kepler 438c. The room fell silent. Sarah had heard of those incidents during her xenobiology training. 3 different colonies, 3 different star systems, all wiped out within the last 5 years. The only survivors were those who managed to escape before the attacks began. "Rakthari," Vorth whispered, his scales turning pale yellow. "The pack hunters." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Rakthari were legendary among the galaxy's peaceful species. Apex predators from a harsh world at the galaxy's edge, they had somehow learned to travel between star systems. No one knew how they navigated space without ships, but they always found colonies of peaceful species. "They hunt in groups of 6 to 12, Kelness continued, his light patterns now flashing in distress patterns. "They track by scent and electromagnetic signatures. Once they mark a territory, they methodically eliminate all sentient life within it." Pip pressed closer to Sarah's neck, her small body trembling. "How long do we have?" "Based on previous incidents, the attacks usually begin within 48 hours of the first signs," Kelness replied. "Sometime sooner." Commander Vorth was already moving toward the communication station. I'll contact the orbital platforms. Request immediate evacuation. The platforms won't arrive in time, Zixtal said quietly. The nearest ship is 4 days away. Sarah looked around the room at her colleagues and friends. Fear radiated from all of them in different ways. The Etherians' light patterns flickered erratically. The Ceridians' scales had turned pale. The Quillans huddled together in small groups, their fur standing on end. What do we know about their hunting patterns? Sarah asked. Kelnis brought up more data. They're extremely intelligent. They can track multiple prey simultaneously, coordinate attacks across wide areas, and they learn from their experiences. Most importantly, they're persistent. Once they mark prey, they don't give up. How do other species usually survive encounters with them? By hiding, Vorth replied grimly. Each species has evolved natural defenses. Etherians can phase shift to become nearly invisible. Ceridians can burrow deep underground. Quillans can compress their electromagnetic signatures to almost nothing. Sarah processed this information. And humans? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Finally, Zixtal spoke. Humans are relatively new to the galactic community. There are no recorded encounters between humans and Rakthari. But theoretically, Sarah pressed, what natural defenses do humans have? Another long silence. Pip spoke first, her small voice uncertain. Humans are adaptable? Sarah almost smiled at the hesitant answer. Adaptable was one way to put it. But as she thought about human evolution, about the long path from the African savanna to the stars, she realized something that made her stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and understanding. Every species in this room had evolved as prey. Their natural defenses were all about hiding, camouflaging, or escaping from predators. But humans had taken a different evolutionary path. We need to start preparing defensive positions, Vorth was saying. Activate the colony's shield generators, seal the entrances, prepare the bunkers. As her colleagues began planning their hiding strategies, Sarah found herself thinking about those claw marks in the forest, about the way the Rakthari hunted in coordinated packs, about their intelligence and persistence. She thought about persistence hunting on the African plains, about humans who could track prey for days across vast distances, about the species that had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain, not through natural weapons or armor, but through intelligence, cooperation, and sheer stubborn determination. As the others made their plans to hide and wait for rescue, Sarah Chen began to form a very different kind of plan, one that her prey-evolved colleagues would never understand, because they had never been the thing that other predators feared. The Rakthari were coming, but they had never hunted humans before.
They had no idea what they were walking into.
The emergency sirens echoed across the colony as the sun began to set. Red lights flashed on every building, and the automated announcement system repeated its message in 12 different languages. All personnel report to designated shelter areas immediately. Sarah watched from the observation deck as her colleagues scattered like leaves in a storm. Each species moved with practiced efficiency, following protocols that had been drilled into them since childhood. These were survival instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. The Etherians were the first to disappear. One moment they were there, their crystalline forms catching the last rays of sunlight, and the next they had phase-shifted into something almost invisible. Sarah could still see them if she looked carefully, like heat shimmers in the air, but she knew that to most predators they would be completely undetectable. Zixtal appeared beside her, only partially phase-shifted so they could still communicate. Sarah, you must come with us to the underground chambers. The phase shift generators can extend their field to include you. How long can you maintain the shift? Sarah asked. Several days if necessary. We enter a kind of suspended animation. Our metabolism slows to almost nothing. We can wait until help arrives. Near the residential buildings, the Ceridians were putting their own survival plan into action. Sarah watched Commander Vorth and his team use their powerful claws to dig tunnels beneath the colony. Their species had evolved on a world where surface predators ruled the day, so they had learned to disappear underground. The tunnel network will connect all major buildings, Vorth had explained earlier. We can move supplies and people through the underground passages. The Rakthari hunt by sight and smell, but they rarely dig deep enough to find us. The Quillans had chosen yet another approach. Pip and her people were sealing themselves inside specially shielded containers aboard their ships. Sarah had visited one of these shelters during a previous drill. The walls were lined with materials that blocked electromagnetic signatures, making the Quillans invisible to any form of electronic detection. "We become like rocks," Pip had explained in her simple way. "No heat, no electricity, no life signs. Very boring for predators." Each species had perfected their hiding strategy over countless generations. They knew exactly how to become invisible to the things that hunted them. As Sarah stood on the observation deck, she felt like she was watching a masterclass in survival techniques. But she also felt completely out of place. Dr. Kellness approached her, his crystalline form pulsing with concern. "Sarah, all other humans in the colony have been assigned to shelter areas. You must choose where you wish to wait out the attack." Sarah looked at the datapad he handed her. The humans in the colony had been distributed among the different species shelters based on compatibility. Some would phase shift with the Etherians, others would go underground with the Sauridians, and a few would hide in the electromagnetic dead zones with the Quillans. "What about natural human defenses?" she asked. "What did the xenobiologists recommend for my species?" Kellness's light patterns shifted to confusion. The analysis indicated that humans have no specialized natural defenses against apex predators. Your species evolved on a world with relatively few large predators, so you never developed camouflage, burrowing abilities, or phase-shifting capabilities. Sarah almost laughed. "No large predators? Earth had plenty of predators." "Yes, but your species eliminated most of them thousands of years ago. The analysis suggests that humans survived through tool use and group cooperation rather than natural defensive abilities." "What about our hunting capabilities?" "Humans are omnivores with some persistence hunting traits, but nothing comparable to dedicated predator species like the Rakthari. The recommendation is to shelter with one of the other species and rely on their natural defenses." Sarah studied the datapad. Every piece of information reinforced the same conclusion. Humans were poorly equipped to handle apex predators. They were slow compared to most species, had no natural armor or weapons, and lacked any form of natural camouflage. "I need some time to think," she told Kellness. "Time is running short." "Sarah, the Rakthari could arrive at any moment. Just give me an hour." As Kellness hurried away to check on the other preparations, Sarah remained on the observation deck. The colony below was transforming before her eyes. Buildings were being sealed, underground passages were opening, and ships were powering down to minimal energy signatures. Within an hour, the colony would appear completely abandoned. Sarah thought about her childhood on Earth, about the stories her grandfather had told her about their ancestors. He had been a historian who specialized in human migration patterns, and he loved to talk about the long journey from Africa to every corner of the planet. "We didn't have claws or fangs," he used to say. "We didn't have thick skin or the ability to fly, but we had something else. We had the ability to never give up." He had shown her maps of human expansion across Earth, arrows flowing from continent to continent, generation after generation pushing into new territories. "Every other species found a niche and stayed there," he had explained. "Lions stayed in Africa. Polar bears stayed in the Arctic. But humans just kept moving, kept adapting, kept pushing into places where they didn't belong." Sarah remembered asking him why humans were different. His answer had seemed simple at the time, but now it carried new weight. "Because we weren't running away from predators, Sarah. We were chasing them." She pulled up her personal files and reviewed her own research into human evolution. The data painted a picture that her alien colleagues had never fully understood. Humans hadn't survived by hiding from predators. They had survived by becoming better predators than anything else on their planet. Persistence hunting, cooperative behavior, tool use, long-distance tracking. Humans had developed all of these traits not as prey animals trying to escape predators, but as predators learning to catch prey that was faster, stronger, and more dangerous than they were. Every other species in the colony had evolved to hide from the things that hunted them. But humans had evolved to hunt the things that hunted everything else. Sarah's comm device buzzed. "Sarah, this is Zixtal. The phase shift chambers are ready. You need to come down now." Sarah looked out at the forest where she knew the Rakthari were moving through the darkness. Somewhere out there, a pack of apex predators was tracking toward the colony, confident in their ability to find and eliminate every living thing. They had never encountered humans before. They had no idea that they were about to hunt a species that had climbed to the top of their own world's food chain by being better hunters than anything nature had produced. "Zixtal," Sarah said into her comm. I'm not going to hide. What do you mean? Sarah was already moving toward the stairs, her mind racing with possibilities. Every species here knows how to hide from predators, but none of you know how to hunt them. Sarah, that's impossible. The Rakthari are apex predators. They're at the top of the food chain. So were saber-toothed cats, Sarah replied. So were cave bears. So were a lot of species that used to hunt my ancestors. She reached the main floor and headed toward the equipment storage areas. I need to gather some supplies. Sarah, please listen to reason. You cannot fight them. No prey species has ever successfully fought the Rakthari. Sarah stopped walking. For the first time since the crisis began, she smiled. That's the thing, Zixtal. I'm not a prey species. Sarah worked through the night while her friends watched in horror from their hiding places. The forest clearing she had chosen was 2 kilometers from the colony, close enough to monitor but far enough to draw the Rakthari away from the real shelters. She had studied the terrain carefully during daylight, mapping every tree, every rock, every possible line of sight. Now in the darkness she moved with quiet efficiency, setting up what would appear to be a desperate survivors' camp. The main tent went up first, a bright orange emergency shelter that would be visible from orbit. She positioned it poorly, too close to the tree line, exactly where someone panicking would put it. Inside, she placed heat generators that would give off human-level thermal signatures and rigged them to automated timers that would simulate sleep cycles. Sarah, what are you doing? Zixtal's voice crackled through her earpiece. The thermal readings suggest you're building some kind of camp. That's exactly what I'm building, Sarah replied, unwrapping a motion generator from her supply pack. A very tempting target. She placed the small device near the tent's entrance and activated it. Every few minutes it would move the tent fabric just enough to suggest someone moving around inside. To watching predators, it would look like prey trying to stay hidden while remaining completely visible. You're using yourself as bait. Commander Vorth's voice joined the communication channel. This is madness. I'm not using myself as anything, Sarah corrected, setting up her second piece of equipment. I'm using this camp as bait. Big difference. The sound system was more complex. She had recorded hours of human breathing patterns, heartbeats, and small movements during her time on the colony. Now she programmed them to play in random sequences that would sound like someone trying to sleep, but failing because of fear. Around the camp's perimeter, she placed scent markers. These were the most important part of her plan. She had collected fabric samples from all the humans in the colony, along with samples of their food and personal items. The scent trail would tell the Rakthari exactly what they wanted to know. Helpless humans were hiding here. The electromagnetic signature is all wrong. Pip's small voice squeaked through the comm. Too strong? They will know it's fake. No, they won't, Sarah said, adjusting the power output on her devices. I'm making it exactly what panicked humans would create. Too much heat because we're running too many devices. Too much noise because we're trying to mask our sounds and failing. Too much electromagnetic activity because we're using technology we don't understand. She stepped back and examined her work. To any observer, it would look like a group of terrified humans had thrown together a makeshift camp and were now huddling inside, hoping to wait out the danger. Every detail screamed of prey behavior, poor positioning, excessive use of technology, and obvious attempts at concealment that only made them more visible. I still don't understand your plan, Dr. Kelness said through the communication channel.
Even if you draw them to the fake camp, what then?
You cannot fight them. Sarah pulled a small device from her pack and activated it. The holographic projector began displaying false life signs inside the tent, creating shadows that moved across the fabric like people shifting nervously in their sleep. Who said anything about fighting them? She asked. She moved to her real position, a carefully camouflaged blind she had constructed 50 meters from the fake camp. Unlike the obvious tent, this shelter was invisible. She had learned the techniques from Earth's indigenous hunters, how to move without disturbing the forest floor, how to create shelter that looked like natural debris, how to remain perfectly still for hours at a time. Her equipment here was different too. No heat generators, no sound systems, no electromagnetic signatures. Everything was designed to make her invisible to the Rakthari's enhanced senses. She had studied their hunting methods from the archived reports, and she knew they relied on detecting technology signatures as much as biological ones. Sarah, you've gone silent on thermal, Zixtal reported. We're losing your readings. Good, that means it's working. From her hidden position, She had perfect sight lines to the fake camp and 3 different escape routes that would take her back toward the colony, without crossing the Rakthari's likely approach paths. She had also identified several secondary positions where she could relocate if her first plan failed. "This is insane," Forth muttered. "No prey species has ever attempted to deceive apex predators like this." Sarah settled into her blind and began the waiting period. This was where human evolution gave her an advantage that her alien friends couldn't understand. Humans had developed persistence hunting techniques that required incredible patience. They could track prey for days, following at a distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But her plan didn't involve striking. It involved something much more sophisticated. "Zixtal, I need you to monitor the Rakthari's approach patterns. When they reach the fake camp, I want detailed readings on their behavior. Sarah, please explain your strategy. We're all terrified for you." Sarah checked her equipment one final time: night vision scope, sound dampening gear, emergency beacon, and most importantly, her analysis tablet loaded with everything known about Rakthari psychology and hunting patterns. "Every predator species follows predictable patterns when they hunt," she explained. "They scout, they plan, they execute. The Rakthari are extremely intelligent, which means they're very good at these patterns. But intelligence can also be a weakness. How so? Because intelligent predators make assumptions based on their experience. The Rakthari have hunted dozens of prey species across the galaxy. They know how prey behaves when it's cornered. They know what to expect." Sarah activated her night vision scope and scanned the forest around the fake camp. Everything was quiet, but she knew that wouldn't last long. Her scent trail would be easy to follow, and the electromagnetic signatures from the camp would be visible to their sensors from kilometers away. "But they've never hunted humans before," she continued. "They have no experience with a species that evolved as persistence hunters. They don't know that humans have been deceiving prey for hundreds of thousands of years." "You're not deceiving prey," Kelness pointed out. "You're attempting to deceive predators. Same principles, different application." A sound echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakable. Something large was moving through the trees, and it was moving with purpose. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her hands remained steady on her equipment. "Contact," she whispered into her comm. "Something's coming." The sound came again, closer now. Then another sound from a different direction. Then a third. The Rakthari were coordinating their approach, surrounding the fake camp before moving in for the kill. "Sarah, get out of there." Forth's voice was urgent. "Come back to the colony. We can protect you." "Negative. This is exactly what I expected. They're following standard pack hunting protocols." Through her scope, she caught her first glimpse of a Rakthari. The creature was massive, easily 3 meters tall, moving through the forest with deadly grace. Its 6 limbs ended in claws that could tear through metal, and its head swiveled constantly, scanning for threats. 2 more appeared from different directions. Then 3 more. A full pack, just as the reports had indicated. They were beautiful in their lethality, perfectly evolved killing machines that had wiped out entire colonies. But as Sarah watched them approach her fake camp, she began to smile. Because they were doing exactly what she had predicted they would do. They were following their instincts, their experience, their assumptions about how prey behaved when, cornered. They had no idea they were walking into a trap designed by a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to outsmart things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than they were. The real hunt was about to begin, and for the first time in their lives, the Rakthari were about to discover what it felt like to be the prey. The first Rakthari reached the fake camp just as the sun began to rise. Sarah watched through her scope as the massive predator crouched at the forest edge, studying the orange tent with intelligent eyes. Its head tilted slightly, and she could see it processing the scene. The obvious heat signatures, the poorly concealed electromagnetic readings, the scent trail that led directly to the shelter. Perfect prey behavior, exactly what it expected to find. 2 more Rakthari emerged from different positions, completing a triangular formation around the camp. Sarah counted 6 total, moving with the precise coordination of a pack that had hunted together for years. They communicated through low-frequency sounds that her equipment could barely detect, planning their attack with deadly efficiency. "Sarah, they're surrounding your position," Sixtal's voice whispered through her earpiece. "You need to evacuate immediately." "Negative," Sarah replied, adjusting her scope to track the pack leader. This is exactly what I wanted. The largest Rakthari, a massive creature with scars across its dark hide, approached the tent cautiously. It extended one clawed limb and touched the fabric, testing for movement. When the motion generator activated and the tent shifted slightly, the creature's muscles tensed in preparation for a strike. Sarah held her breath. This was the critical moment. If her deception was discovered too early, the pack would scatter and begin hunting for real threats. But if it worked, the pack leader's claw sliced through the tent fabric in one swift motion. The other Rakthari moved simultaneously, converging on the shelter from all sides. Claws and teeth tore through synthetic material, heat generators scattered across the ground, and the sound system's speakers died with electronic squeaks. For several seconds, the clearing filled with the sounds of destruction as 6 apex predators obliterated what they thought was a group of helpless humans. When the violence stopped, the pack leader stood among the wreckage holding pieces of the heat generators in its claws. The confusion that followed was exactly what Sarah had hoped to see. The pack leader's body language changed from confident aggression to puzzled frustration. It sniffed the debris, searching for the scent of blood that should have accompanied their kill. The other pack members began investigating the scattered equipment, their movements becoming more erratic as they realized their mistake. Phase 1 complete, Sarah whispered into her comm. They've discovered the deception. The pack leader let out a roar that shook the trees around the clearing. It was a sound of pure rage, the cry of a predator that had been tricked by what it thought was helpless prey. The other Rakthari responded with their own calls, and Sarah could hear the frustration in their voices. Now they're angry. Forth's voice crackled through the communication channel. Angry predators are more dangerous. Angry predators also make mistakes, Sarah replied. She watched as the pack began to spread out, searching for the real humans who had created the false camp. Their previous coordination began to break down as individual Rakthari followed different scent trails and electromagnetic signatures. This was where their intelligence worked against them. They were trying to solve a puzzle they didn't understand, using assumptions that no longer applied. Sarah activated the first of her prepared surprises. Hidden speakers throughout the forest began broadcasting human voices, recorded conversations from the colony's daily life. The sounds came from multiple directions, creating the illusion that humans were scattered throughout the woods, hiding behind trees and rocks. The effect on the pack was immediate. They split up further, each Rakthari pursuing what seemed to be a different group of humans. Sarah watched through her scope as the pack leader charged toward a speaker hidden in a hollow log, only to find another piece of human technology when it arrived. Incredible, Dr. Kelnis's voice whispered through the comm. You're using their hunting instincts against them. Sarah activated her second surprise. Motion detectors hidden throughout the forest began triggering, creating movement signatures that looked like humans running from tree to tree. The Rakthari, already frustrated and confused, began chasing these false signals across the landscape. Every predator has weaknesses, Sarah explained as she watched the pack scatter across a wider and wider area. The Rakthari's weakness is that they're too intelligent. They overthink the hunt because they're used to prey that follows predictable patterns. One of the younger Rakthari had followed a false trail almost a kilometer from the original camp. It stood in a small clearing, turning in circles as it tried to understand why the scent trail had suddenly vanished. Sarah could see its confusion from her elevated position, and she almost felt sorry for the creature. Almost. Phase 2 complete, she reported. Pack cohesion is breaking down. They're pursuing individual targets instead of working together. Now came the dangerous part. Sarah began to move from her concealed position, using human persistence hunting techniques that her alien friends had never witnessed. She moved silently through the forest, staying downwind of the scattered Rakthari, tracking them as they tracked her false signals. But unlike them, she wasn't chasing her targets. She was hurting them. Each time a Rakthari got too close to the real colony, Sarah activated a speaker or motion detector in the opposite direction, drawing the creature away from her friends. When one of them began to recognize the pattern and started moving back toward the pack, she triggered sounds that suggested a large group of humans was fleeing in another direction. Sarah, your life signs indicate you're moving. Pip's worried voice came through the comm. You said you wouldn't fight them. I'm not fighting, Sarah replied. slipping between two trees as one of the Rakthari passed 50 meters away. I'm managing them. The pack leader was the most difficult to manipulate. It was older, more experienced, and it had begun to understand that something was wrong with this hunt. Instead of chasing false signals, it had started moving back toward the colony, using its own intelligence to deduce where the real humans must be hiding. Sarah had prepared for this possibility. She activated her final surprise, the most sophisticated part of her plan. Hidden throughout the forest were dozens of small devices that could mimic electromagnetic signatures, identical to those produced by the colony's life support systems. When activated simultaneously, they created the illusion that the entire human population had evacuated to a location 20 kilometers away. The effect was spectacular. Every Rakthari in the forest suddenly detected massive electromagnetic activity coming from the same direction. To their enhanced senses, it would look like dozens of humans had gathered in one location, probably around some kind of emergency shelter. Sarah watched through her scope as the pack leader raised its head, scanning the horizon toward the false signal. Its body language changed again, this time from confusion to renewed confidence. It had found its prey. The pack leader let out a rallying call, and within minutes the other Rakthari began converging on its position. They reformed their hunting formation and began moving toward the false electromagnetic signatures, leaving the real colony completely undefended. "They're moving away from us," Zixtel reported, her voice filled with amazement. "The entire pack is heading north." Sarah remained in her concealed position as the last Rakthari disappeared into the forest. She waited another hour, making sure they were truly gone before finally speaking into her comm. "Colony is clear. Threat has been redirected." "How long will they chase the false signals?" Vorth asked. Sarah checked her equipment readings. "The electromagnetic generators have enough power for about 12 hours. The Rakthari will spend most of that time trying to reach a location that doesn't exist. By the time they figure out they've been deceived again, the rescue ship should be here. And if they come back," Sarah smiled as she began dismantling her equipment, "they won't. I've been studying predator psychology for my entire career. Pack hunters like the Rakthari have massive egos. They can't accept that prey outsmarted them. They'll convince themselves that the humans escaped somehow, rather than admit they were outmaneuvered." She packed her gear methodically, leaving no trace of her presence. As she prepared to return to the colony, her comm crackled with voices from all of her friends. Amazement, relief, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Sarah," Zixtel's voice was thoughtful. "Your species, you were never prey, were you?" Sarah paused in her packing. Through the trees, she could see the colony in the distance, safe and intact. Her friends would be emerging from their shelters soon, returning to their normal lives because a human had turned the galaxy's most feared predators into the hunted. "No," she replied simply. "We were the thing that taught other predators to be afraid." 3 days later, Sarah sat in the colony's main conference room, surrounded by her alien colleagues and a holographic display showing the rescue ships approaching in orbit. The Rakthari had never returned. Long-range sensors showed them heading toward the galaxy's edge, apparently convinced that this world held no suitable prey. The debriefing had taken hours. Every detail of Sarah's plan had been analyzed, recorded, and transmitted to the Galactic Council. Representatives from a dozen species had requested copies of her tactical recordings. The humans' first encounter with the galaxy's apex predators had become the most studied incident in recent galactic history. But it was the quiet conversation afterward that would change everything. "I still don't understand how you knew it would work," Dr. Kellness said, his crystalline form pulsing with confused patterns. "The psychological warfare, the deception tactics, the way you predicted their behavior. How did one human outwit an entire pack of creatures that have destroyed civilizations?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, tired but satisfied. "Because I had an advantage they've never encountered before. Every species they've hunted before evolved as prey, but humans evolved as predators." Zixtal's musical voice carried notes of uncertainty. "But humans are not physically superior to the Rakthari. You have no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, no specialized hunting adaptations." "Physical hunting adaptations," Sarah corrected. "But we have something else. We have brains that evolved specifically to solve the problem of catching prey that was faster, stronger, and more dangerous than we were." She activated the conference room's display system and called up a holographic representation of human evolutionary history. The image showed early humans on the African savanna, small figures pursuing massive animals across vast distances. My ancestors hunted woolly mammoths, she said. Creatures 10 times their size with natural armor and deadly tusks. They hunted cave bears that could tear them apart with one swipe. They hunted saber-toothed cats that were perfectly designed killing machines. Commander Vorth's scales had turned pale green with what Sarah recognized as awe. How? Persistence, patience, and, most importantly, the ability to think like their prey. Sarah changed the display to show human migration patterns across Earth. We didn't just hunt these creatures. We studied them. We learned their habits, their weaknesses, their psychology, and then we used that knowledge to predict their behavior. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Pip was the first to speak, her small voice barely audible. You did the same thing to the Rakthari. Exactly. I studied their hunting patterns, learned their psychology, and used their own instincts against them. It's the same technique humans have been using for hundreds of thousands of years. Dr. Kelness's light patterns shifted to something Sarah had never seen before. If she had to guess, she would have called it fear. Your species? You eliminate apex predators as a matter of course? We eliminated every apex predator on our planet, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Not because we wanted to destroy them, but because they competed with us for resources. Lions, tigers, bears, wolves, they're all still alive, but they exist in preserves that we allow them to have. They're no longer apex predators. We are. The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah could see her colleagues processing this information, comparing it to their own evolutionary histories. Every species in the room had ancestors who had learned to hide from predators, to run from threats, to survive by avoiding confrontation, but humans had learned to hunt the hunters. There's something else, Sarah continued, calling up another display. The Rakthari aren't just apex predators. They're persistence hunters just like humans. They track prey across vast distances, they coordinate in groups, they use intelligence to solve hunting problems. They're like you, Zixtal whispered. They're exactly like us, but they've only ever hunted prey species. They've never encountered another apex predator, another persistence hunter. They had no framework for understanding what they were facing. Vorth leaned forward, his tongue flicking out nervously. What happens when other human colonies encounter them? Sarah considered the question carefully. The Rakthari are intelligent. They learn from their experiences. After this incident, they'll know that humans are different. They might avoid human settlements entirely, or they might adapt their hunting strategies. And if they adapt, then humans will adapt faster. Sarah smiled grimly. That's what we do. It's what we've always done. Every time we encountered a new threat on Earth, we found a way to overcome it. Environmental changes, natural disasters, competing predator species. We adapted faster than anything else on the planet. Dr. Kelness's form had dimmed considerably. The galactic community has been searching for a solution to the Rakthari threat for decades. We've lost 3 colonies, thousands of lives, and you solved it in 3 days. I had advantages your species don't have. My brain is wired for predator psychology. I understand persistence hunting, pack coordination, and psychological warfare because my ancestors used those techniques for survival. Will you teach these techniques to other species? Pip asked hopefully. Sarah shook her head. It wouldn't work. These aren't just techniques you can learn. They're ways of thinking that evolved over millions of years. You can't teach a prey species to think like a predator any more than I could teach myself to phase shift or burrow underground. The implications hung in the air like a thunderstorm. The galactic community had just discovered that they shared space with a species that could casually outmaneuver their most feared enemies. A species that had eliminated every major threat on their homeworld, not through advanced technology, but through superior hunting instincts. What does this mean for human integration into galactic society? Dr. Kelness asked carefully. Sarah had been thinking about that question since the crisis began. It means we need to be very careful. The galaxy is full of species that evolved as prey. When they realize what humans actually are, some of them might be afraid of us. Should they be? Vorth asked bluntly. Sarah met his gaze steadily. That depends entirely on how they treat us. Humans have lived peacefully alongside former prey species on Earth for thousands of years. We protect species that once feared us. We only become dangerous when we're threatened or when something threatens those we care about. She gestured to include everyone in the room. You're my colleagues and friends. The Rakthari threatened you, so I dealt with them. It's that simple. And if someday a species threatens humanity, Sarah's smile disappeared. Then that species will discover why the Rakthari learned to avoid human space. The rescue ships arrived 6 hours later, but the conversation in that conference room would echo throughout the galaxy for years to come. Word spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species seeking peaceful coexistence. They were apex predators who had conquered their entire planet and then reached for the stars. Some species would welcome them as protectors, allies who could defend against threats no one else could handle. Others would fear them, seeing in human eyes the same calculating intelligence that had outmaneuvered the galaxy's most dangerous hunters. But Sarah knew that humanity would find its place among the stars the same way they had found their place on Earth, by adapting, by learning, and by never backing down from a challenge. As she filed her final report on the Rakthari incident, she included a note that would become required reading at every galactic xenobiology institute. Humans are persistence hunters who eliminated all competing apex predators on their homeworld through superior intelligence, coordination, and psychological warfare. They should be approached with respect but not fear, as long as their communities and allies are not threatened. However, species considering aggressive action against humanity should be aware that they would be initiating conflict with the galaxy's most successful predator species. The report was classified immediately, but its conclusions shaped galactic policy for decades. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy, not through demonstrations of military might or technological superiority, but by proving that some things in the universe were still more afraid of humans than humans were of them. And in the end, that made all the difference.